Welcome to the Freak Show, fellow freaks.
I'm Matthew Brockmeyer.
And I'm Krista Carmen.
And this is
Murder Coaster.
Step right up, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, sorry, you must be this tall to ride the Murder Coaster. And we mean that most sincerely, as today we will take you on a journey of torture and sexual depravity that will savage your soul. So buckle up as we enter the dark mind of David Ray Parker and his toy box of depravity and pain. A story too shocking to believe. This monster of a man was aided and abetted by not only his fiancée, but by his very own daughter, who'd bring him victims to torture. And today's episode is a request by listener Tom Robinson, who says he's a fan because we're not afraid to tell the gory details. This one's for you, Tom, and we hope you enjoy it.
Let's begin. Prologue. The land of truth or consequences.
Don't go away. It's time to play Truth or Consequences.
In March of 1950, the hit game show Truth or Consequences announced it would air its 10-year anniversary in the first town that changed its name to Truth or Consequences. And a little town in New Mexico named Palamos Hot Spring quickly changed its name to that of the show. The episode was aired from the dusty little desert town, and millions tuned in to the live broadcast. And 10,000 people from all over New Mexico came to celebrate, lining the streets for an extravagant parade. Since then, the town has celebrated the event every May with a fiesta, rodeo, a beauty and dance contest, and a large stage show.
But while the event may have put the sleepy town of Truth or Consequences, or TRC, as it became known, briefly on the map in the 1950s, by the 1990s, the town had fallen on hard times and was mockingly called Shithole USA by some residents. While tourists still came for the famous hot springs that the native Apache had bathed in for centuries, springs that are rumored to cure arthritis, the main commerce is drugs, namely methamphetamine. TRC sits on Interstate 25, one of the main routes of drugs coming over the border from Mexico. The town is surrounded by dozens of trailer parks, many overrun with speed freaks and druggies, run by biker gangs manufacturing meth. And it's not uncommon to have a trailer explode from an unstable laboratory.
This Wild West culture of drugs and bikers and the desert also attracted others with sinister agendas they knew would go unnoticed in such a rough and tumble place. People like hardcore bondage aficionado, rapist, and suspected serial killer David Ray Parker.
About 5 miles north of TRC lies the quiet and serene lakeside community of Elephant Butte Lake. Boasting a beautiful state park and the largest lake in New Mexico, it's a popular tourist attraction for campers and boaters. The town is so small, there isn't even a single traffic light.
On the afternoon of Monday, March 22nd, 1999, the stillness and serenity of the peaceful desert community of Elephant Butte was shattered when a naked woman covered in blood and bruises, with a padlocked metal collar around her neck connected to 5 feet of chain, burst from a trailer, screaming hysterically as she ran through the deserted streets.
A blue Chrysler turned down dusty Lakeshore Road, and the naked woman ran to it, howling for help, reaching for the door, but the lady driving the car quickly hit the lock button and sped off.
Another car approached, and she ran towards it, wildly swinging her arms to flag it down. But the car swerved around her and tore off in a cloud of dust.
Man, this is like a literal nightmare. I've had this dream. You're naked running down the street trying to escape some unknown monster. I don't know. I have really fucked up dreams though.
It's also just like a crazy, like I've often thought about because it's like, if you see that you see this scene in horror movies all the time
Yeah.
too. And it's like you'd like to think that you are both kind enough and discerning enough to help someone in need. But like, especially people with kids or what, like you get approached by something like that and the shitty sort of go-to for like, I mean, you want to protect yourself and that more than it, like a woman with a metal collar around her neck. I mean, that's like looking like she escaped some Saw situation. I mean,
She did.
yeah, I don't know if I would open the
Yeah, I've
door
wondered that
for.
myself. I'd like to think I would. I think I would. But it does. If you have children in the car, I can.
Yeah, and
It's
it's
a tough
also
call.
different too. Like it's different. I think it's different. Maybe picking somebody up off the road like that. Again, if you were by yourself, or if it was like me and my husband, who's 6'3" and however many pounds over me, you pick up a woman, that's one thing. But I also feel like it's different if somebody knocks on your door in the middle of the night screaming and hollering for help. Like I wouldn't want to let anybody in my house because then who knows what's happening. I don't know. And also a lot of times you hear things about these being setups, like,
Yes, you
which
do.
is terrifying. So yeah. So anyway, back to our story. Seeing a well-kept double-wide trailer with a beautiful garden, the door wide open, the hysterical woman sprinted toward it and burst inside, slamming the door shut behind her and locking the bolts, taking the owner, Darlene Breach, who was sitting inside watching television, completely by surprise.
As Darlene says,
She came straight in, wearing nothing except the chains around her neck, and was crying. She was bloody, very bloody, and was a terrified girl.
Darlene called 911 and brought the trembling girl a bathrobe. When police arrived, the woman told them a harrowing story of abduction and 3 days of torture.
The woman's name was Cynthia Vigil. Cynthia was a pretty 22-year-old sex worker from Albuquerque, over 150 miles away. While working in Albuquerque, a meeting had been arranged with a kindly older man, bespectacled, a friendly glint to his eye, and a charming smile, driving a white Toyota pickup with a camper shell. But when Cynthia entered the camper shell, the man had flashed a badge and told her she was under arrest, then pulled out a pair of handcuffs, at which point a lady, much younger than the man with bleach blonde hair, leapt into the camper, brandishing a stun gun. Cynthia made a quick dash for the door, and the man and the lady leapt on her, slammed her down, kicking and punching her, forcing her hands behind her back and securing her wrists behind her with the handcuffs.
As the man drove off, the lady shackled Cynthia's feet and secured them with chains to eye bolts on the sides of the camper, then began to duct tape her mouth shut. They eventually pulled over, getting cigarettes and cheap wine, and made Cynthia strip naked. They put a black leather mask with a zippered mouth over her head and then elaborately hog-tied her with rope before driving off again.
The truck bounced along for what felt like an eternity as Cynthia lay helpless in the darkness of the leather mask, hands cuffed behind her back, not knowing where she was being taken. Eventually, the truck pulled to a stop. Cynthia was untied and brought, still handcuffed and shackled, to a bed and bound spread eagle. A metal collar was padlocked to her neck with a chain. And then there was the click of a cassette player, the low hum and hiss of the tape before a recorded voice boomed out.
Hello there, bitch. Are you comfortable right now? I doubt it. Wrists and ankles chained, gagged, probably blindfolded. You are disoriented and scared too, I would imagine. Perfectly normal under the circumstances. For a little while, at least, you need to get your shit together and listen to this tape. It is very relevant to your situation. I'm going to tell you, in detail, why you have been kidnapped, what's going to happen to you, and how long you'll be here. I don't know the details of your capture, because this tape is being created July 23rd, 1993, as a general advisory tape for future female captives. The information I'm going to give you is based on my experience dealing with captives over a period of several years. If, at a future date, there are any major changes in our procedure, the tape will be upgraded. Why say that shit? It's so ridiculous. Now, you are obviously here against your will, totally helpless, don't know where you're at, don't know what's gonna happen to you. You're very scared or very pissed off. I'm sure that you already tried to get your wrists and ankles loose, and no, you can't. Now you're just waiting to see what's gonna happen next. You probably think you're gonna be raped, and you're fucking sure right about that. Our primary interest is what you got between your legs. It's gonna take a lot of adjustment on your part, and you're not gonna like it a fucking bit. But I don't give a big rat's ass about that. It's not like you're gonna have any choice about the matter. You've been taken by force, and you're gonna be kept and used by force. What all this amounts to is that you're gonna be kept naked and chained up like an animal, to be used and abused anytime we want to, any way that we want to. And you might as well start getting used to it, because you're gonna be kept here and used until such time as we get tired of fucking around with you. And we will eventually, in a month or two, maybe 3. It's no big deal. My lady friend and I have been keeping sex slaves for years. We both have kinky hang-ups involving rape, dungeon games, etc. We found that it is extremely convenient to keep 1 or 2 female captives available constantly to satisfy our particular needs. We are very selective when we snatch a girl to use for these purposes. Now, as I said earlier, you're gonna be kept like an animal. I guess I've been doing this too long. I've been raping bitches ever since I was old enough to jerk off and tie little girls' hands behind their back. As far as I'm concerned, you're a pretty piece of meat to be used and exploited. I don't give a flying fuck about your mind or how you feel about this situation. You may be married, have a kid or 2, boyfriend, girlfriend, a job, car payment. Fuck it. I don't give a rat's ass about any of that. I don't want to hear about it. It's something you're gonna have to deal with after you're turned loose. I make it a point never to like a slave, and I fucking sure don't have any respect for you. Here, your status is no more than one of the dogs, or one of the animals out in the barn. Your only value to us is the fact that you have an attractive, usable body. And like the rest of our animals, you will be fed and watered, kept in good physical condition, kept reasonably clean and allowed to use the toilet when necessary. In return, you're gonna be used hard, especially during your first few days while you're new and fresh. You're gonna be kept chained in a variety of different positions, usually with your legs or knees forced wide apart. And that's the easy part. Our fetishes and hang-ups include stringent bondage, dungeon games, a little sadism, nothing serious, but uncomfortable, and sometimes painful. Just a few little hang-ups that we like to use when we're getting off on a bitch. If you're a young teeny bopper and ignorant about fetishes and deviations, you're about to get an enlightening crash course in sex. Who knows? You may like some of it. It happens, occasionally. If we're gonna take the time and trouble, even under these conditions, most bitches can be brought to orgasm. Now, I'm sure that you're a great little piece of ass and you're gonna be a lot of fun to play with, but I will get tired of you eventually. If I killed every bitch that we kidnapped, there'd be bodies strung all over the country. And besides, I don't like killing a girl unless it's absolutely necessary. So I've devised a safe, alternate method of disposal. I had plenty of bitches to practice on over the years, so I've got it pretty well down pat, and I enjoy doing it. I get off on mind games. After we get completely through with you, you're gonna be drugged up, Real heavy, with a combination of sodium pentothal and phenobarbital. They are both hypnotic drugs that will make you extremely susceptible to hypnosis, auto-hypnosis, and hypnotic suggestion. You're going to be kept drugged a couple days while I play with your mind. By the time I get through brainwashing you, you're not going to remember a fucking thing about this little adventure. You won't remember this place, us, or what happened to you. And there won't be any DNA evidence because you'll be bathed, and both holes between your legs will be thoroughly flushed out. You'll be dressed, sedated, and turned loose on some country road. Bruised, sore all over, but nothing that won't heal up in a week or two. The thought of being brainwashed may not be appealing to you, but we've been doing it a long time and it works. And it's the lesser of two evils. I'm sure that you would prefer that in lieu of being strangled or having your throat cut. Okay, undoubtedly someone's going to be looking for you. They may or may not be a missing person report, but nobody's going to be looking for you here. They don't have any idea where you're at. You don't even know where you're at. We're always careful about that. There are not going to be any knights in shining armor coming to rescue. You are strictly on your own. And, under the circumstance, I bet that's a scary thought. The hidden playroom, where you're going to be kept, has steel walls, floor and ceiling. It is virtually soundproof and has a steel door with 2 keyed locks. The hinges are welded on and there are 2 heavy deadbolts on the outside. The room is totally escape-proof, even with tools. Anytime that you are left unattended in the room, your wrist will be chained, and there are electronic sensors too. Let us know if you move around too much. And if that's not enough, there's a closed-circuit TV system with a surveillance camera. It's wired to the main TV in the living room, so we can check on you once in a while, or just sit and watch you for the fun of it. Electronics is a wonderful thing. Expensive, but hell, everything in the room is expensive, and damn well worth it. If everybody knew how much fun it was to keep a sex slave, half the women would be chained up in somebody's basement. Anyway, we've had a lot of practice at this, and we're not real concerned about you escaping. You're fucking sure not going anywhere. Now let's get this off right. You are a slave. You don't realize it yet, but you will eventually. I'm your master, and the lady is your mistress. You will be totally docile. You will be very quiet, and you'll speak only when spoken to. Never initiate conversation. Keep your mouth shut. Anytime that you are spoken to, you will be required to respond, and it will be with proper speech. Remember that we are in the dungeon game. And as long as you are here, it's the only game in town. Anytime that you are asked a question or a yes or no answer is required, you will respond by saying, yes, master, no, mistress, no, master, etc. You will show proper respect. Having to use the word master or mistress may sound funny, petty, or vain to you, but that's all right. If you choose not to do it, you can laugh while you're being whipped or when your body is convulsing under the electroshock machine. Well, I believe I told you about everything that I can. I cannot predict the future. I can't predict changes of procedure. But if this tape is playing for you, I have to assume that it's still reasonably accurate. And I can only give you advice. Be smart. Be a survivor. Don't ever scream. Don't talk without permission. Be very quiet. Be docile and obedient. And by all means, show proper respect.
Jesus Christ. This somehow is only a portion of that harrowing and awful tape. And the torture that befell Cynthia after this tape was played is beyond comprehension in its depravity and cruelty.
As the lady held a gun on Cynthia, threatening to shoot her if she tried to escape. The older man, with the charming smile and playful glint to his eye, wheeled in a small generator with wires hanging out of it. Alligator clips were placed on Cynthia's most sensitive parts, and she was shocked as she was assaulted with foreign objects. And then, oh man, this is really fucked up. This is hard for me to even say. Like, a dog was brought in. The dog was used to sexually assault her.
Just when I think we can't do a more effed up episode than like Ramirez or Albert Fish or what have you. Get to
The
this.
depravity of humanity. It's insane.
The next day, there was more assault and torture. This time, a video monitor and camera were set up so she could actually see herself being tortured. She was hogtied and suspended to the ceiling and shocked with a stun gun until she passed out from the pain. When she came to, it was morning the next day, and the man was dressed in a park ranger uniform and unlocking Cynthia's handcuffs and shackles, but leaving the padlocked collar around her neck, keeping her chained to the wall like a dog.
The man told her she hadn't seen nothing yet, and that he'd be taking her into his toy box when he got home from work. He then casually tossed the keys to the padlocks on a table and strolled out the door as the bleach blonde lady sat on the sofa in the other room watching soap operas.
Cynthia called out to the bleach blonde woman, asking her how long they were going to keep her captive. The woman told her until they got tired of her, then said their plan was to kidnap a 10-year-old girl and raise her to be a sex slave.
Oh man, these are some fucking monsters. The bleach blonde woman then went into another room, at which point Cynthia made for those keys sitting on the table. She stretched the chain on her neck as far as it would go, got down on the floor, and pushed her feet out towards the table, extending her body to the absolute limit, and just managed to hook her toes around the table leg and drag it slowly towards her. Then she quickly leapt up, grabbed the key, and opened the padlock attaching the chain to the wall, freeing herself. She then crept to the telephone and dialed 911. But before an operator could even answer, the bleach blonde woman came barreling in from the other room, grabbing a heavy glass lamp and smashing it over Cynthia's head, howling,
"You're not going anywhere!"
As blood poured from the wound on Cynthia's head, she grabbed a large ice pick and, using it like a hammer, attacked the woman, smashing her in the head over and over, knocking her unconscious, then burst out of the door of the trailer, running naked through the deserted, dusty streets, screaming.
It wouldn't take police long to find their culprits. The man with the friendly smile and the bleach blonde woman were soon apprehended in the same truck they'd used to abduct Cynthia, trolling through the trailer parks looking for their lost captive.
And when law enforcement went to the residence where Cynthia had been held captive, they'd discover horrors of which they could hardly comprehend. One of which was the toy box, where the man had told Cynthia he was taking her when he got home from work.
The toy box was a 22-foot-long white cargo trailer, a sign in the entrance reading, "Bondage Room, Satan's Den." Inside was something from a horror movie. The centerpiece of the trailer was a fully functional remote control gynecological chair, over which was suspended a television monitor rigged to a camcorder so victims bound in the chair could watch themselves be tortured. The walls were lined with rows of glass cabinets like you'd see in a doctor's office, the shelves filled with dildos and strange sex toys of all shapes and sizes, as well as whips, syringes, medical supplies, chains, pliers, weights, and devices labeled vaginal stretcher, ankle spreader, and knee spreader. Against the far wall sat an empty coffin with a sign above it reading,
"Don't let her get to you. If she was worth taking, she's worth keeping. Never trust a chained captive."
Good God. From the ceiling hung an elaborate pulley system incorporating clamps, ropes, padlocks, and tie-downs. There were hundreds of videotapes and photographs of women being tortured, as well as bizarre drawings, some quite old, even a little toy diorama of the torture chamber with tiny dolls. The man would later describe the toy box as a museum of sexual torture.
The FBI would eventually load the toy box into the back of a tractor trailer and haul it to their Santa Fe branch for specialized forensic analysis. A young FBI agent named Patty Rust was given the job of meticulously going through the trailer and inventorying each and every item. Special Agent Patty Rust was a former captain in the U.S. Army with an advanced degree in criminology.
This tough, experienced FBI agent would be so scarred and traumatized by the contents of the toy box that after finishing her assignment, she took her service revolver and shot herself in the head.
Fuck, man. So insane, dude.
The man with the friendly smile initially told police that Cynthia had volunteered to be tortured as a means of curing her heroin addiction, but then shut up and demanded a lawyer. But the bleach blonde woman, whose name was Cynthia Hendy and was the man's fiancée, quickly confessed.
She claimed her fiancé was a serial killer who had murdered at least 14 women, filming their deaths and selling the videos on the underground snuff market in Mexico. She claimed there was bodies buried in 3 states, including as many as 6 dumped in Elephant Butte Lake, brought far out to hidden parts of the lake where the water was the deepest. Their abdominal cavities were cut open and filled with rocks. The bodies then wrapped in chicken wire and dumped in the lake, where catfish and crawdads would devour the remains.
The man with the friendly smile, a 59-year-old mechanic for Elephant Butte Lake State Park, was named David Parker Ray. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is where our story truly begins.
Truth or consequences?
Chapter 1, Little David Ray. David Parker Ray was born on November 6, 1939, in Belen, New Mexico, a tiny town deep in the desert. He had a younger sister named Peggy, born only a year after him. His father was a violent drunk who beat the family mercilessly and who eventually abandoned them when David was only 10 years old. So David and his sister were sent to live with their grandparents on their ranch in Mountain Air, literally in the middle of the desert. The nearest neighbor was 10 miles away, and their school over 25 miles away.
Little David Ray was a very shy kid, and his grandfather insisted he button his shirt to the very top, and the other boys would make fun of him for this.
Now, wearing a shirt with the top button buttoned is a tricky thing, and I actually will rock this look. But there's basically 3 ways it can go. The first is a hip, avant-garde artist look, which is obviously the one I'm going for. And you can see this with folks like David Lynch or David Byrne. The second look you'll get is the Chicano gangster look, especially if you have the bottom half unbuttoned. And if you wrap a folded bandana low on your forehead so it's dead level with your eyes, you've gone full vato. A great example of this look is Mike Murr, lead singer of Suicidal Tendencies. And the third look you can attain, if you're not careful, and one I avoid, is the stereotypical developmentally disabled person, as evidenced in murdering ghoul Ed Gein, or the guy from that movie Sling Blade. But I suspect that is the look little David Ray was given off in school.
David's grandparents were very strict as well as very religious, and his grandfather would beat him for any infraction, believing, spare the rod, spoil the child. Little David was a poor student with a D average. He wasn't athletic and didn't play any sports. A teacher would later say about him,
I hardly even remember him as a student. He was just the usual little nice boy who lived with his grandparents on their cattle ranch. I can't remember him causing any trouble.
But when David turned 13, his grandparents gave him a Cushman pacemaker motor scooter. And it was then he discovered his great aptitude as a mechanic, a skill he'd use and capitalize for the rest of his life.
But even then, he was harboring dark fantasies of rape and torture. He'd even draw these fantasies out, creating his own weird pornography, which was found by his sister. Worried, she confronted him about the disturbing drawings, but he just laughed and said it was a new hobby.
Later, David would claim he murdered a girl as a teenager by tying her to a tree and torturing her to death. There's no proof to this at all, but it's something he's said often. Perhaps it was such a deep fantasy that it became real in his mind. In the medical paper, Genesis of a Serial Killer, Fantasy's Integral Role in the Creation of a Monster, Dr. Jeremy Anderson says, quote, sexually sadistic fantasies help to control the child's fear and act as an outlet for hostility and aggression. These aggression-centered fantasies, initially a form of escape for the child, come to serve as a substitute for the child's sense of mastery. In other words, the child learns to depend on the fantasies for feelings of control over self and over the external world. End quote.
In 1957, David's grandmother died, and he was sent to live with his mother in Albuquerque, his sister staying behind on the ranch. She'd been his only friend.
David graduated from high school in Albuquerque, married a 17-year-old girl, got her pregnant, and then joined the army and was sent overseas, where he served as a general mechanic, further honing his skills. Back home, his wife had their baby, a boy named David, and then abandoned the baby to the Department of Welfare and filed for divorce. The child ended up in the care of David's mother.
But David was quick on the rebound and was soon married again, getting hitched in 1962. And this marriage only lasted 3 months before they were divorced. But just 4 years later, David is back at the altar again, now 26 years old and marrying a quiet 18-year-old girl named Glenda. And on May 2nd, 1967, the two would have a daughter named Glenda Jean Ray.
Glenda Jean was a feisty child who would display a stubborn independent streak, and she and her father would grow to have an absolutely bizarre relationship. And I mean truly bizarre, that we will soon get into.
But when Glenda was just a few months old, David Ray abandoned his family and took off on the road because he'd become a hippie. He grew his hair long, started listening to the Beatles, and smoking weed, and hitchhiked all over the American Southwest, accompanied by a young hippie girl named Sally. The two ended up in a truck stop in Tierras Canyon, where David started working as a mechanic, and David and Sally were given a place to stay. Everyone liked Sally. She was very sweet and innocent, confiding once that she'd actually been a virgin when she met David. She was very reliant on him. But one day, Sally just disappeared with all her things.
Everyone thought it was odd that Sally hadn't said goodbye, told anyone she was leaving, just had vanished into the desert. David simply laughed about it and said she was a free spirit, and a few months later, David himself hitchhiked off. He was tired of being a hippie and went back to his wife and child in Albuquerque, a family whom he'd never once mentioned to anyone during his time as a wandering free spirit.
Back with his family, David Ray started taking classes to be an airline mechanic and was soon certified and moved his family to Tulsa, where he secured a respectable teaching job at the prestigious Spartan School of Aeronautics. He taught there for 6 years, quietly becoming more and more preoccupied with bondage, rape, and torture. Many years later, the FBI would come to that area, searching for bodies.
For reasons unknown, David Ray quit his well-paying job and moved his family to Victoria, Texas, where he ran a gas station for a while, before finally resettling back in Albuquerque, where his third marriage fell apart.
It's at this point that David Ray changes his last name to Parker, which had been his mother's maiden name. Why? It's unknown. Maybe to reinvent himself and turn a new leaf, or maybe because of more sinister reasons. We don't know. But he moves to Phoenix, Arizona, where he becomes lead mechanic for Canal Motors. He was considered an excellent mechanic and stayed in Phoenix for the next 8 years, helping turn the repair shop into a thriving business, all the while delving deeper and deeper into hardcore bondage and sadomasochism, seeking out women who enjoyed being tied up and having rough, violent sex.
He gets married for a 4th time, and this is when he buys his infamous double-wide trailer and extra-large lot at Black K, lot number 8 at Elephant Butte Lake. Originally, it was meant as a place for weekend getaways, a place where he could secretly take women for sexual bondage sessions. January of 1991, David Ray Parker quit his job and moved there full-time, making a living designing specialized bondage equipment he sold through ads in porno magazines. Because nearly all his neighbors were retired snowbirds who only came during the winter months, the area was nearly deserted most of the year, which would become quite convenient as his sinister ways grew. He also made it his mission to know every square inch of the Mammoth Lake, over 38,000 acres of water, some of which was over 200 feet deep, dotted with rock formation islands with names like Kettletop and Black Bluffs, and filled with 80-pound flathead catfish that will quickly devour whatever they find, including a human body.
Truth or consequences?
Chapter 2. Glenda Jean. David Ray's daughter, Glenda Jean, grew into a tall and lanky girl, much resembling her father, living in Albuquerque in southeastern Texas with her mother. She was a tough little girl, a tomboy, and started going by the name Jessie. She'd visit her father at his trailer in Elephant Butte, and he bestowed on her his love of nature, taking her out in the lake fishing. He taught her about auto mechanics, which she was also quite skilled at, easily able to take a motor apart and put it back together. And the two also shared a love of guns and often target practiced, Jessie becoming an expert shot. And apparently, David Ray was not shy about displaying his passion for bondage and violent sex to his daughter as well. Once she witnessed him hire a prostitute in Phoenix for a bondage session, and when it became too rough, the woman came running out from the bedroom, naked and hysterical.
But when Jessie turned 19, she became very conflicted about her father's dark and deviant sexuality, and she went to the FBI, stating he was kidnapping women, torturing them, then bringing them to Mexico and selling them as sex slaves. The FBI brought David Ray in for questioning, but nothing came of it.
Somehow, despite informing the FBI about her father, Jessie and David Ray remained close, and she often visited him in Elephant Butte. Jessie would learn to not only accept her father's deviant ways, but to embrace them and become an accomplice in his acts. And 13 years later, the FBI would again become aware of David Ray when a naked woman covered in blood, a chain dangling from her neck, came tearing out of his trailer screaming.
No one's surprised, Jessie came out as a lesbian and fell into a relationship with a woman named Terry, whom she called her wife, and in 1990, Jessie gave birth to a baby girl named Kyla. Rumors abounded that David Ray was the biological father, though Jessie claimed it was a friend named Wayne.
But Jessie had a fiery temper, and she and Terry argued often, the fights often escalating into violence, resulting in the police being called. And after briefly living in New Orleans, Jessie left Terry and moved into her father's trailer in Elephant Butte. She became a local fixture in the bars and taverns of Truth or Consequences, where she'd play guitar and hustle pool, her prowess on the billiard tables becoming legendary, and rode about town on a black Honda motorcycle, decked head to toe in leather. And she wasn't shy about being a lesbian, earning the nickname Dyke on a Bike, a name she adored.
8 years after having turned her father into the FBI, Jessie and David were closer than they'd ever been before. But even close friends would remark how odd their relationship was, how he seemed to worship her, and how she became more than accepting of his obsession with bondage and torture.
One Saturday night in September of 1993, Jessie was at the bar drinking with a woman named Jill Troya. After that night, Jill disappeared. and was never seen again.
Truth or consequences?
Chapter 3. The Elephant in the Room. On September 22nd, 1998, the body of a man was discovered floating in the middle of Elephant Lake. It was a man wrapped in a blue tarp, tied with ropes and weighted down with boat anchors. He'd been shot in the back of the head, execution style. It would take 10 years for the body to finally be identified as William Bowers, who was Dave Ray's boss, whom he'd hated and had gone missing a year before the body was found.
Not long after moving permanently to Elephant Butte, David Ray bought his toy box trailer. In his sick and depraved mind, he saw himself as a sexual scientist, constructing a laboratory of abuse, spending countless hours designing torture apparatuses and soundproofing the trailer.
But to the community of Elephant Butte, he appeared a respectable and hardworking good citizen. He started an auto repair and towing service called Dave's Automotive and developed a reputation as a good neighbor and a man who would go out of his way to help people.
In 1994, David Ray Parker's fourth marriage fell apart, and he changed his name again, this time to David P. Ray. He abandoned his automotive repair business and became a mechanic for the Elephant Butte State Park. There, he designed and built a portable lighting unit for $48 that the park was going to purchase for nearly $8,000 and was named Employee of the Month. That lighting unit he designed became standard equipment for nighttime emergencies and special events and is still used to this day.
Truth or consequences?
Chapter 4. Sassy. Meanwhile, Jessie had become something of a social butterfly in the rough-and-tumble bar scene of T or C, and had her own gang of friends, one of whom was Kelly Cleve, a tall, willowy blonde in her early 20s who'd moved to New Mexico from Kansas. Kelly was wild and fun and was given the nickname Sassy.
In the spring of 1996, Sassy met a 20-year-old Marine named Patrick Murphy, and the two started on a whirlwind romance. But Patrick had another admirer as well, named Cassandra, who was constantly trying to seduce the young Marine. So Sassy and Patrick decided to hold a fake wedding just to prove to Cassandra that they were serious. But when the day for the fake wedding came, Patrick proposed for real, and they actually got married. And the two lovebirds ended up in the courthouse making vows to each other.
Unfortunately, Sassy suffered from a medical condition that could sometimes make intercourse painful, and the young Marine was very amorous and wanted to engage in as much sex as possible before being sent back into service. They fell into a spat, and Sassy headed off to the bar with some friends, including Jessie.
It was a Thursday afternoon at Rocky's Lounge, the tavern populated with an assortment of bikers, speed freaks, and Native Americans. While the rest slammed shots, chasing them down with beers, Sassy only drank soda, as she was the designated driver that day. But at some point, as the day turned into evening, Sassy says she remembered feeling lightheaded and strange. And the next thing she remembers is being in David Ray's trailer. Jessie on one side of her, David Ray on the other.
Jessie was holding a knife to her throat as David handcuffed her and locked a leather collar around her neck. Sassy, going in and out of consciousness, was brought into the toy box, stripped naked, and put into the gynecological chair. After she was strapped in, David used smelling salts to fully awaken her, and she found herself staring into her own terrified face being projected on the television monitor in front of her. Sassy would be kept in the toy box for 3 long and grueling days.
Meanwhile, her new husband, after initially being worried, mistakenly assumed his brushing bride had ran off with another man and went to find solace in the bottom of a bottle, only to find himself drunkenly in the arms of Cassandra, who assured him his new wife had definitely ran off and he should get the marriage annulled, which he set about doing.
3 days after being abducted, Sassy was led out of the toy box by David Ray. She was in a deep stupor, having been heavily drugged. David drove the incoherent girl to her husband's house wearing his starched park ranger uniform and told the young Marine he'd found his wife wandering the shore along Elephant Lake. Her husband was astonished at her condition. She was usually a clean freak, constantly showering and washing her hair. But now she was filthy, her hair a wild mess, covered in sand, utterly bedraggled, and missing her wedding ring.
The young newlywed confronted his wife, demanding to know where she'd been. When she said she didn't know, that she couldn't remember anything, the furious Marine told her the marriage was over. He was getting an annulment, and he slammed the door in her face. They'd been married just over 2 weeks. David Ray ended up giving her a ride to town.
Just 2 days later, the handsome Marine married Cassandra in Las Vegas. The marriage lasted 9 weeks, and when Cassandra divorced him, she was able to seize all of his assets and leave him completely broke.
That is such a fucking crazy story, isn't it?
It's wild.
Truth or consequences?
Chapter 5. Toy Boy Roy. Dennis Roy Yancey was born in Truth or Consequences, the son of a policeman and a legal secretary. Dennis was a wild child and went by the name Toy Boy Roy. At 16, he was a heavy metalhead with a little gang of delinquents that would go drinking and rampage through graveyards, destroying headstones and graffitiing 666 everywhere, even poisoning neighborhood dogs and supposedly sacrificing cats to the devil. Then he was arrested for breaking into his English teacher's house and leaving a severed dog penis on her computer keyboard, as well as stealing over $3,000 of her property.
But old Toy Boy Roy managed to graduate from high school and enlisted in the Navy, where he served 4 years, returning to TRC with a GI Bill ready to go to college and make something of himself. But old habits die hard, and soon he was doing drugs, growing his hair long, and hanging out in the bars, where he became extremely friendly with Jessie, who introduced him to her father, David Ray, and soon Boy Toy Roy was initiated into their bondage and sex parties.
Roy and Jessie were good friends with a man named Kenneth Lee Lane, often partying with him at his apartment on West 2nd Street. On New Year's Day, 1996, the police were called to the apartment when neighbors complained of a strange smell. Police entered the apartment to find blood splattered on the walls, pentagrams scrawled on the table where black candles had been burning, and Lane's body lay there rotting. His stomach was filled with nuts and bolts, and a doorknob had been crammed up his rectum. And the death was ruled as accidental metal poisoning. What the fuck?
Like, what on earth? Right. I mean, gosh, of course he would have been poisoned by all of the nuts and bolts and doorknobs in his stomach and rectum. Like, totally normal otherwise. Toy Boy Roy dated a very attractive ex-prostitute with a meth addiction named Marie Parker for a while, but the two eventually went their separate ways. He'd introduced her to Jessie and David Ray. In July of 1996, Marie was drinking in the Blue Waters Saloon when Roy and Jessie showed up and said they were going to score some meth and asked her if she'd like to come along. She said yeah, and the three headed off, but instead of going to a dealer's pad, Jessie pulled a gun on Marie, handcuffed her, and drove her to her father's trailer in Elephant Butte.
There, Jessie led the weeping Marie, who was hysterical and pleading for her life, into the toy box and strapped her to the gynecological chair. According to Toy Boy Roy, the father and daughter team tortured and sexually assaulted her together for over 2 days. Jessie then brought Roy a length of rope and told him he knew what to do. According to some accounts, Jessie held a gun to Roy's head and demanded he strangle his ex-girlfriend. But regardless, Toy Boy Roy slipped the rope around Marie's neck and choked the life out of her. David Ray, filming the event, and later selling the video as a snuff film.
Afterwards, the three, Roy, David, and Jesse, drove the body to the remote Monticello Canyon and buried it in a ravine.
Knowing they were the last ones seen with Marie, Jesse and Roy headed to Texas and laid low in Galveston until the missing person investigation went cold.
Truth or consequences?
Chapter 6. Thank God for Stephen King. Truth or Consequences had an abundance of meth-addicted, sexually deviant women that David Ray befriended and brought into his bondage and orgy circle, often hosting wild swinger parties. One of these women was Cynthia Lee Hendy.
Cynthia Lee Hendy was a 37-year-old speed freak and sometimes prostitute from Washington State, on the run from the law and hiding out in TRC, where she earned herself the name Six-Pack Cindy, as she'd sleep with any man who bought her a six-pack and gave her a line of crank. It's said she originally hooked up with Jesse, and the two were lesbian lovers for a while, but then she moved on to Jesse's dad, David Ray. And here we see one of those crazy alignment of the stars when two sadistic psychopaths find each other and fall in love. Cynthia was not only ready and willing to join the orgies David Ray had become known for, she was also very eager to do some torturing, and soon would be a full-on accomplice to abduction and rape.
When Boy Toy Roy eventually returned, he reinvented himself as a gay man and fell in love with a fellow named David Riviera. Roy introduced Riviera to Jesse and David Ray, and they even went out sailing with them for a party on the lake, which soon turned into an orgy below deck. It started off as some wild swinger fun, but soon a woman, Angelia Montana, was handcuffed and bound to a table, and as Jesse videotaped, David Ray began to shock her genitals with a cattle prod. Eager to get in on the action, Cynthia Lee Hendy then sexually assaulted the screaming and hysterical woman with a pistol. Old Boy Toy Roy was absolutely surprised when his new boyfriend was shocked by all this and wanted no part in the torture.
Angelica Montana had initially been very upset about being tortured there on the boat. She'd let herself be handcuffed as it seemed a wild and kinky fun time in the midst of an orgy, but she hadn't been prepared to be tortured like that, and she threatened revenge, threatened to get the police involved. But as time passed and her bruises faded, she appears to have forgiven the group. And on February 16th, 1999, Angelica called Cindy and told her it was her boyfriend's birthday and she couldn't afford a birthday cake.
Cindy told her she had some cake mix and would bring it to her, and the two arranged to meet. But when Cindy showed up, she didn't have the cake mix and claimed to have left it back in Elephant Butte. So they headed to David Ray's trailer. Once inside, David pulled a knife on Angelica and told her she was being, quote,
abducted against your free will.
When Angelica laughed, David punched her in the gut, and Cindy put a pistol to her head, telling her to do what she was told or she'd blow her brains out. Angelica was stripped naked, shackled, and handcuffed to the bed, fitted with an eyeless leather mask. She was then played the tape and given an orange pill, at which point she lost consciousness.
For the first day of her captivity, Angelica was chained to the bed while Cindy and David Ray went about their daily activities, watching the first part of the Stephen King miniseries Storm of the Century on the television that evening. On the second day, Cindy and David Ray took Angelica to the toy box, where she was sexually tortured, shocked with a generator, a stun gun, and a cattle prod. But Angelica was smart, and when she could, she pretended she liked it. She acted like it was a big game, and she made sure to do all she could to sexually satisfy David Ray, later saying,
If I would have fought them and started being a bitch, I think I would have died.
And soon, David and Cindy were back in their living room. The torture session cut short because the couple wanted to watch Storm of the Century. Angelica would later say,
Thank God for Stephen King. Boy, they sure wanted to watch it.
In the morning, David, Ray, and Cindy drove Angelica to a bus stop, and Angelica thanked them and told them she'd like to do it again someday. She then quickly left town and went into hiding, terrified and suffering immense post-traumatic stress disorder. But David Ray was so happy and pleased with his new girlfriend and torture partner, Cindy, that he asked her to marry him. And the two lovebirds were engaged. Oh, isn't that romantic?
Truth or consequences?
Chapter 7. Busted. For David Ray and Cindy's next victim, they decided to head to Albuquerque and abduct a prostitute, decking out their camper with eye bolts and chains, hiding stun guns and handcuffs. The plan went perfectly. That is, until their captive was able to overcome Cindy and go barreling out of the trailer, naked and covered in blood, a chain dangling from her neck. The police soon picking up David Ray and Cindy as they trawled the trailer park looking for her.
After being arrested, David Ray was charged with kidnapping, 3 counts of criminal sexual penetration, assault with intent to commit a violent felony, and kidnapping. Cindy was charged with kidnapping, accessory to the crime of criminal sexual penetration, assault with intent to commit violent felony, criminal sexual penetration, and conspiracy to kidnap. The judge set bail for each of them at a record $1 million.
Cindy immediately gave a long, rambling confession, claiming David Ray Parker was a serial killer with bodies littered through the Southwest.
And on April 26th, David Ray's daughter Jessie was arrested at her father's trailer and charged with 12 counts of kidnapping, criminal sexual penetration, and conspiracy to kidnap. 4 days later, in the shadow of the infamous toy box tortures, which had been reported by the press the world over, Truth or Consequences celebrated the 50th anniversary of its name with a fiesta, parades, and a rodeo.
As the preliminary hearings on the crimes began, a burlap sack was found floating in Elephant Butte containing bits of human flesh and bone fragment, but it had been in the water for much too long to get a DNA sample, so the identity of who the flesh and bone had come from has never been established.
Meanwhile, both David and Jessie were putting pressure on Cindy to recant her confession. Jessie was in a jail cell right next to Cindy, and David, in an effort to win her affection back, went and had Cindy's name tattooed on his arm by a jailhouse tattoo artist and wrote her constantly. Oh, isn't that sweet?
And it worked. While the judge refused to let her change her plea of guilty, she said she would no longer testify against her fiancé, a huge win for David Ray. Furthermore, because the prosecution was late in entering their expert witnesses qualifications, they were excluded from the trial, a massive blow to the prosecution, who lost their DNA, violent crime, and hair experts, which were essential to the case, and which they blamed on the slowness of the FBI.
Cindy, who'd already pleaded guilty, was sentenced to 36 years. And on the same day, Angelica Montano died of pneumonia. She was only 25 years old, but the combination of drugs, alcohol, and the dreaded toy box had been too much for her body and spirit to handle.
Old Boy Toy Roy was rounded up, though, and he confessed to killing Marie and was given a 20-year sentence.
It was ruled that David Parker and Jessie would be tried separately, and each victim would receive their own separate trial, which the prosecution opposed, as they said the victims' testimony corroborated each other. And in another shocking blow to the prosecution, the judge excluded photographs of the torture equipment as well as the infamous audio tape. David Ray couldn't have been happier.
Trial of David Ray Parker for the crimes against Cynthia Vigil lasted 2 months. It was harrowing, but in the end, the defense was able to show doubt as to whether she'd entered the toy box willingly or not. And after a hung jury, the judge declared a mistrial. David Ray was ecstatic and beaming.
But don't count your chickens before they're hatched, for in the next trial, all the photos would be allowed, and that terrible, terrible tape will be played for the jury. And that retrial found him guilty on all 12 counts.
For his next trial, David Ray pled guilty and was sentenced to 224 years in prison. But in making the plea deal, he was able to obtain leniency for his daughter, Jessie. And on September 17th, 2001, Jessie walked out of prison a free woman after receiving a 9-year sentence with 6 years suspended and over 2 years served, telling the press, quote, "It feels pretty damn good to get out," end quote.
That's fucking crazy. And on May 28th, 2002, Ray was taken to the Lee County Correctional Facility to be questioned. It was hoped he'd give answers to the many, many mysteries surrounding this case and give closure to the grieving families of so many missing women. But David Ray Parker would take his dark secrets to the grave, because before the interrogation could even begin, he dropped dead right there of a massive heart attack.
In 2010, old Boy Toy Roy was paroled, but just 3 months later violated the conditions and was sent back to prison for another 11 years. He was released in 2021.
Cynthia Vigil, the victim who solved the case by overpowering Cindy and running free, she founded Street Safe New Mexico, a volunteer harm reduction nonprofit that seeks to help sex workers and other vulnerable people living on the street.
And that is the story of David Ray Parker and his infamous toy box of torture. What do you think of this one?
Ooh, it's a heavy hitter, you know.
I can't believe Cindy is out.
You mean Jessie?
Cindy is out now too.
Is she?
Yeah. There's articles from a month ago. Accomplice of toy box killer now living in Kent neighborhood, shocking residents.
Oh, wow. Crazy. Yeah, I mean, fuck. I don't know how it's... do you think he's a serial killer? How many do you think he killed all?
Yeah, that's like a weird aspect. Well, first of all, I think it's very strange that his boss ended up dead and, like, come on.
He hated him.
But, right, like, do we really...
I think he killed him, for sure.
Think that was a coincidence? I mean, that's pretty gnarly.
That lake is so big. Like 200 feet deep in places.
Yeah, it's crazy, though, because it's like... Usually, when stuff like this all starts to get dredged to the surface, no pun intended, but it's like the details can't help, like, then people come forward, and it's crazy that he didn't get charged with any murders. And I don't know. I mean, I don't know how you could be so horribly sick and twisted, and it doesn't seem like he could have possibly had any qualms about murdering a woman that he tortured for days on end.
He bragged about having done it as a teenager. Although
right.
There's no proof of it. I don't know if that was like a fantasy that became real in his head or what. Because he seems like a little dorky kid. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. The whole thing's just...
It's so disturbing. Oh. It was hard reading
crazy.
That tape. Oh, man.
And I can't believe his daughter was, like, part of it, and that she's out, and Cindy, like,
she was a big part of it. That's fucked up that they let her go.
Yeah. Also, like, just freaks you out to think of, like, I mean, this is obviously a very well-known case, but it's like, it makes you wonder, like, how many people with crazy arrests and former sentences that they've served are, like, out and about and on the streets and in the neighborhood that you live in, and you have no idea of what they had done in the past.
Yeah, be careful out there, everybody. It's a fucked up world, man.
Touche. True that. So, yeah, I don't know. We'll have to, interested in hearing what people's thoughts are on this one, because it's a doozy.
Yeah, let us know. You think he's a serial killer? I mean, I do. I really do.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with you.
There's so many people, like, just go missing in the case.
Yeah.
Well, Thanks so much for listening, everybody. We truly appreciate it, and we want to hear from you. Did we get something wrong? Do you have a case you think we should cover? You just want to say hi? Drop us a line at murdercoasterpodcast@gmail.com. That's murdercoasterpodcast@gmail.com. We will see you next week. We have another insane case that you just will not believe.